we had the Chinese going after some of the most senior government officials in the Salt Typhoon case, right? Going after their cell phones. If they had broken into an office and stolen papers, we would have done diplomatic expulsions. Why does it need to be a cyber equivalent? Why don't we P&G their top diplomats?
Well said. Welcome to Cyber Focus from the McCrary Institute, where we explore the people and ideas shaping and defending our digital world. I'm your host, Frank Cilluffo, and this week we're on location. We're at RSA for Cyber Prom, and I have the privilege to sit down with one of the best minds in cybersecurity and a very, very popular speaker at RSA, Rob Joyce. Rob Joyce is known to every one of our listeners, I'm sure, but he was a former ran the Cybersecurity Directorate at the National Security Agency, served as a special assistant to the president on cyber matters, and was also head of the Tailored Access Operations Office, TAO at NSA. So, Rob, great to have you. Thanks for joining us today.
Awesome to talk again, Frank. Thanks.
So let's start with sort of a general question. This is madness at RSA. How are you doing? What are you thinking? What are you hearing? And what are you saying, most importantly, on some of these issues?
Well, what I'm hearing is AI all the time,
24 by 7,
right?
yeah.
And it's interesting, I'm having great conversations not only on what AI can do, what it can't do, but thinking about agents, because we're about to give agency to these, these digital employees and ask them to do things on our behalf. And I am convinced that it's going to be an attack surface that is not ready for the criminals and nation states that are going to come at it. So thinking about, what does it mean in both the attack surface and then what do we have to do to trust these agents has been a lot of conversation.
That's a great point, and I just have to foot stomp something where when you start thinking about AI dominance, you also have to be energy dominant, which means you're adding a new attack surface to a traditional critical infrastructure that's already sort of at the top of the list, right? So when it comes to data centers and energy and the like.
Yeah,
so
these are very energy hungry.
Yeah, no kidding. And new risk, new threat, new vulnerability, and new opportunity. So let's jump into, obviously, a lot of discussion around the Communist Party of China, their intentions in cyber, looking at all the typhoons, whether it's Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, Flax Typhoon, Silk Typhoon, and whatever typhoon is going to come up tomorrow. You've done a lot of creative work. You've testified before the CCP committee on Capitol Hill. Where are your thoughts? How should we be thinking about China today?
Yeah, so a few thoughts on that. The first is the work of Volt Typhoon to pre-position in critical infrastructure. That's something that we have to use every tool we have to push back and stop their willingness to do that, right? The Director FBI, Director NSA, CISA, all testified to the Hill that their intent in doing that is to cause societal panic. Translated, that word is terrorism.
Absolutely.
They want people in the US afraid at the time and place of their choosing when we're entering a conflict with China or there's escalating tensions. And that just isn't something we should accept, right? If China were running around and strapping Semtex to bridges,
We'd be up in arms, right?
We wouldn't tolerate that. But they're strapping digital Semtex to our energy grid, to our pipelines, to our airlines, and we've got to stop that.
And that's very different than the intentions behind, say, Salt Typhoon, which was arguably the biggest biggest cyber espionage campaign the U.S. has ever seen. But Volt clearly was intended to pre-position at a time of their choosing. Do we need red lines? Are we finally at the point? So I agree, there have been a lot of outspoken leaders talking about this, but I haven't seen the imposition of cost or consequence.
Yeah. People ask me what should we be doing, and for me, it is about the cost and consequence dials have to be turned up to the point that it is painful and they decide the cost is not worth the outcome potential. And I think we can get there in the case of critical infrastructure threats. In the case of Salt Typhoon, you're completely right, Frank, that is a different beast. It is espionage, right?
And there's gambling going on in casinos, right?
For years, we've been expelling, spies and diplomats in response to human espionage. And it still goes on because as nations, you need to know the plans and intentions of your adversaries. But again, the strapping digital Semtex, that's not something we accept. And so there's a lot of levers we've got to be using. I talked to Congress and my point was we have not turned all the dials to 11. We've done a lot of things on the menu, but we've done them timidly and we've never done them in grand concert and with aggression and vigor. That's one of the things about the new administration I think is good, is they are willing to do strong decisions and push back hard, and I'm hoping they choose to do that in the cyber world.
And I definitely want to pull on that thread momentarily, but again, I'm wondering, in terms of Volt Typhoon, we do need to lean forward. What that looks like obviously entails all instruments of statecraft, but not to put a fine point on it, but it's not just the Communist Party of China, it's everyone else watching, learning, listening, and if there's not a commensurate response or a response, it's just going to invite more, right?
Right.
So the question is do we need these red lines? And I think around critical infrastructure we probably do. And I'm with you, not across everything. So let's talk offense. So I've been pretty outspoken on this. We're never going to firewall our way out of this problem. We have to impose consequence on bad behavior, or you're just going to see the same bad behavior. How do we translate some of these nouns into verbs? And on this podcast, we've discussed NSPM 13 in an unclassified way in terms of what the implications were around that. But what does that look like in practice in your eyes?
Yeah, so let me back up one step though. I really believe there's a three-legged stool needed. You need to improve your defense. We've made it too easy, but defense will never stop them from trying, and it's never going to be completely successful.
You don't win. You can, at best, stay even.
So you need the cost imposition, and for me, cost imposition is, again, a toolbox of things, offensive cyber but we definitely need to up the offensive cyber to impose costs. And the third is resilience, right? That when somebody does get something through, that we understand how to recover and ride through it. But to your specific question on the offensive cyber, I think we've not done a good job with definitions yet. What is defend forward?
Exactly.
What is
persistent engagement?
What is persistent engagement? And you talk to different people, whether it's in industry, in government, on the Hill, executive branch or legislative, and they have different views. And if we all have our own mental model, but they're different, we're not communicating.
Well said.
And so I want people to be much more specific about what are we asking people to do, right? So there's definitely a desire for more offense. So the first question I'd ask is, have we enabled Cybercom, CIA, and others to do that on behalf of the government in an inherently governmental function, right? I don't want somebody authorizing letters of marque and reprisal to industry that has the bar down here and Cybercom still has the bar up here, right? So let's first take the government's professional cyber forces and make them more effective. NSPM 13 was the first step in that.
And dealt with some deconfliction too, which is important, right?
Yeah, but there's still a ways to go, right? There's still more to be done where, I call them mission type orders, where you give a mission to the cyber force and say, you are going to execute this on our behalf. And at that point, those professionals, do the deconfliction that's required, but they have the agility to operate in cyber speed and do maneuver warfare in cyber the way we would expect in a kinetic fight. You don't have an attack plan, find out that the enemy is in a different position, or you have some success and you've got the opportunity to continue to push, and then stop and phone home and they write papers and coordinate across the interagency to think about what they do next. So that would be my first thing, is let's
and the Title 10 mission here is very important, but like you said, it's cyber, and so there are going to be other agencies that can play a significant role. So you do need to expand that a little bit, right? I mean, I'm reminded of the old counterterrorism discussion, and I would argue the greatest breakthrough since 9/11 was really standing up JSOC to the point that Title 10, Title 50, it was seamless. It should have been before, but it wasn't. But that took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, figuratively and literally.
So Frank, I led counterterrorism at NSA post 9/11, and that shaped me, right? Watching JSOC, Admiral McChrystal, or General McChrystal, Admiral McRaven, and what they were able to do, because they brought the interagency together, right? There was NSA, CIA, FBI, but there was also Treasury people in the middle of that, operational jock. So they were part of the fight. And so, we need to think about how State Department, Treasury, Commerce, FBI, NSA, CIA, CISA, all the other elements of DHS use their authorities to the maximum extent possible for that cost imposition.
And I want to, because I think you framed it exceedingly well. It is all instruments of statecraft, all instruments of government. But the thing that I would also add to that equation is when you look at it's not only bringing the agencies into the fight, but industry. And I think there's another piece of the puzzle, that this isn't just a cyber issue, it's a China issue, it's a Russia issue, it's an Iran issue, it's a DPRK issue. So you can't just look at cyber means in itself, right? So it has to be looked at even beyond just the cyber community.
Yep.
Is that fair?
Fair.
And do you think we can do that? Do you think that that's going to be a pretty big house that you're going to have to build?
We've come a long way. We haven't gone all the way on that journey, but I look at what the hyperscale cloud providers can see inside their own enterprise. And then you combine that with what the government can reach out and see inside the classified protected networks of our adversary. And the marriage of those two things is, that all-source picture that the counterterrorism fight wanted.
The Brits call rich picture. You have some experience with the Brits in that, right?
So, and I think we need to understand, that discussion about the Chinese plans and intention didn't come because of an incident response firm catching the Chinese inside critical infrastructure. Now you could see that, it walked like a Chinese duck, it quacked like a Chinese duck. You could attribute it as a Chinese duck, but
you need other sources to verify.
The intelligence said it was their intent to cause societal panic. And that actually informs the policymakers to say, oh my gosh, this is a real threat. This is beyond the red lines. The incident response folks could say there's no good intelligence here. There's not commercial value, so they could intuit some of it. But to really set and hold a red line, now you've informed, and that's what's going to drive resources, new authorities, and the changes we need to do.
And I think that concept gets lost sometimes, that government brings more than just cyber capabilities. It's all source that can verify, corroborate, or prove otherwise. So I think that is an important element in that discussion.
And even in cost imposition, right? Again, I'm going to make another analogy. We had the Chinese going after some of the most senior government officials in the Salt Typhoon case, right? Going after their cell phones, right? If they
at a pretty critical time too.
If they had broken into an office and stolen papers, we would have done diplomatic expulsions, from their embassy. We didn't
What
use...
is the cyber equivalent of PNGing?
Well, no, why does it need to be a cyber equivalent? Why don't we PNG their top diplomats?
Well said, well said.
You know, that is
Touché.
cost imposition,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Reduce the footprint of their embassy and consulate in the US because they're not behaving in a normative fashion. Those are the tools that are outside the cyber toolbox that we're not using. And I really think we've got to bring all those to the table.
And demonstrate that cyber does meet the bar. It's a means to an end anyway. Yes. It's really about their intentions. So you brought up letters of marque. So, and historically looking at the broader active cyber defense sets of questions, I think it immediately goes to hackback. There's so much between put up a firewall and hack back, and that should be a role that perhaps industry plays. I'd be curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I'm still of the old school that, you know, it's an inherently governmental function, right?
But what about operational collaboration?
It's not a no role, right? Because we do campaigns where, you know, the government does some things in the hacking space. Cybercom may take down things in foreign environments, while the FBI has a warrant to do things domestically, right? I also think, you know, we again, going back to my earlier comments, we've got to define what hackback means. Are you talking about the botnet infrastructure that was enabling the theft of data? Are you talking about the repository of information that came out of a business that sits in a server somewhere? Right, and what are you allowed to do? Are you allowed to burn down that server? And you know, what if it is just a
might have some consequences,
European
right?
business, right?
Yep.
And even farther than that, you know, I talked to some of the policymakers, whether it's executive branch or Congress, and you know, they want to see the lights go off in Beijing. And you know, is that inbounds for the commercial entities to decide, choose, and execute?
Exactly.
Or is that something that, you know?
But if there's a collaborative where it's got an operational, that's a difference, because at the end of the day, maybe one does the action, the other helps inform the action.
Yeah, and we've had that for years. You know, NSA has no Title 10 authorities. But we will often plan and supply the vital information that then, in a collaborative sense, Cybercom executes, right? And it is cheek to jowl together, and that actually happens with industry at times, right?
And Rob, you've been very eloquent in making the case to lean forward. What do we do, say, with ransomware gangs that are provided safe haven in largely Russia or some of the former Soviet republics? How do we square that circle? I don't think we've exhausted our creative ways of getting them to travel to cool places where we do have extradition treaty, but how do we get around that challenge?
Yeah, the Bureau's done great work with their partners in international law enforcement, but they're only going to get to a small percentage.
Onesies and twosies,
yeah. But again, I think it is a national concern, and you've got to use all elements of national power, right? You've got to convince Russia, China, North Korea, Iran that it is not in their national best interest to be allowing these activities to emanate from their borders. And you know, you do that with pain points that probably aren't cyber in most cases. I'm not saying give up on the cyber things. It's yes and.
In reason, yeah, absolutely. We touched on AI to begin with, and you can't go 2 feet without having an AI discussion here. Yeah. What are some of your thoughts? And I've asked most of our guests, does AI benefit blue, red, the defender, or or those on offense? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my strong belief is those who use AI will outperform those who don't.
Period.
And
for whatever their purpose is.
It's both sides. Yep. I do think
so it's purple?
Yeah, the living off the land techniques that are kind of the in vogue for the highest end actors again. Those things, AI can help us at scope and scale, because if you can get an unblinking AI to look at your network and your digital terrain and understand what normal is, and somebody comes in and steals Frank's identity, digital identity, and then all of a sudden Frank's machine is talking to 6 machines you've never talked to before, or you're moving data in ways and on time periods that you never moved data before, somebody needs to look at you and your account. And it may be that you were just promoted into a new job, it may be you've been given a task force that you're doing unusual things, but most of the time I think it's going to illuminate the bad actors manipulating and abusing identity. And so I think that's the strength in the AI near term. But I'm also watching the adversaries.
Yeah.
You know, the AI lets you do things at speed and scale, and that is so hard to defend against.
And it really lowers, the bar was already low vis-a-vis some of the more traditional projections of power and military and economic and the like for cyber actors, but it's been lowered even, it's down to the ground pretty much when you start looking at AI.
Yeah, it's farther, but I do think, you know, it's kind of like coding, right? You can now talk to an LLM and have it generate some pretty sophisticated coding. But if you are not even a programmer, at some point you hit an error that's unrecoverable. But in the hands of a real programmer, those same tools 10 or 100x you. So in the hands of somebody who is a skilled hacker, you know, using AI and the sophistication
as an enabler and to augment,
they will go farther, faster, wider. And
you know, and I do think last year I had Phil Venables on, and he made a very strong case that it's going to benefit the defender, and I think he's right, but I also think he's wrong, because I think it's not as simple as either or, black and white set of matters, because the defender has to be right all the time, right? And I think you touched on this in a different way, and forgive me if I framed it wrong and disagree with me, but the cyber hygiene initiatives, that's where AI can really have the critical controls that we all know, whether it's the 20 or whether it's 25, whatever list we're going to be working on. That can be very helpful and should be utilized, right? From a blue perspective.
You got to do the basics first, and you know, I have a quote going back more than a decade now where I said NSA was successful in our hacking operations because we knew the terrain, the network better than the defenders. We knew the devices better than the people who built
building them,
because we spent the time to worry the details. And so now you've got artificial intelligence that can sweat details. And you watch, and OpenAI's now got their high-end models that are better than the best competitive programmers on the planet.
Absolutely.
Right.
DeepSeek a concern for you, or?
All of them are, you know, capable. I think the American frontier models continue to excel. The innovation is still coming out of, you know, the U.S.
But we can't take it for granted, right?
We cannot. And the difficulty in a lot of these AI conversations is that the breakthrough concept, like if you think chain of thought reasoning, the O1 model that came out of OpenAI, it can be kind of described in 2 or 3 sentences. And so if you can have that conversation about what is the concept between a chain of thought model, between 2 researchers that already are in the field, that other researcher now has the seed plant and is able to grow that plant. And a lot of the AI, it's a continual evolution where the breakthrough is not something that's going to be a unique tech lead for 10 years. That and especially with the movement of researchers between companies, between universities, that information wants to be free and propagate. So you've got to continue innovating.
Well said. And I would argue that, I mean, I also feel like we're always reacting to, whether it's TikTok, Kaspersky, whether it's Huawei, whether it's ZTE, whether it's DeepSeek. We've got a lot of lists. Commerce has their list.
Don't
IC
forget
has
TP-Link.
theirs. TP-Link, exactly, which you just testified on. But that's bound. That's literally a whack-a-mole approach. Is there a better way to do this? And this opens up the broader supply chain issue.
Yeah, my core focus is who writes and updates that software? Who's in charge of the algorithm and the features? You know, that's where TikTok comes back to. TikTok is able to dial that algorithm to emphasize or de-emphasize the topics of their choosing. They can put things in front of millions or billions of eyes at once. Think about the campaign to call your senator, right? That was the most misguided idea ever.
Exactly.
But in the case of TP-Link, they update the software on the most prevalent network connected devices in the US now. And today, if it's fine, that's good. But if we have a point of escalating tensions and China tells TP-Link, I need them all to to turn off for my Volt campaign, Volt Typhoon campaign, or I need them all to have an easy known exploitable flaw for my operations. Chinese companies can't say no. It's in the law.
Exactly.
And so who owns, operates, writes your software is really important.
It matters.
And I thought I was pretty clear to Congress, and it resonated. They get it, right?
Good,
so I think we'll see action.
And to be, not put a fine point on it, but it's hardware, software, firmware, and pretty much everything else in between.
I am up the stack, right?
How far up the stack are you?
It's really hard to do hardware backdoors, and they're very, there's
I think Hezbollah may have different
there's an evidence chain. You've got to look. You've got to look at your threat model, right?
Yeah.
For technology we're deploying into the White House or the embassy in Beijing, you want to make sure you understand the hardware lineage and that nothing's been tampered. But for mass market products, if you're expending to put a hardware backdoor in there, boy, there's much better ways to skin that cat. But the software matters, and that's why I differentiate. There are good American designed and updated and managed products that are built in China, and I don't have the same concerns as something that's designed, engineered, and especially continually updated from China. That's the difference.
So AI is here now. Quantum, you can't escape without a discussion, and certainly in your old business, whether it's cryptography, cryptology, on both sides, that could be a game changer, yes? And not to oversimplify it, but it has the potential to basically render all your secrets vulnerable and protect, and or if you're on the other end, protect all of your secrets. What does that mean going forward, and how far away are we?
Yeah, so the government, US government, issued an executive order for the US government to have all of our systems quantum secure by 2034. So that kind of gives you a time frame. It's not a today problem, it's not next year.
But it's a real game changer when it comes.
But it's in the window, it's a game changer. And the other thing people don't understand often is they think about the secrets. Again, we talked about what's your threat model, and it's different if you're trying to communicate out of Moscow and Beijing, as opposed to, I need to protect my secrets of what I'm talking to on my orders from Amazon or my PII for my medical history. But the other thing quantum is threatening is a lot of our authentication is based on public key cryptography. So the ability to log into a network, to authenticate to a system, or to sign a piece of code that is supposed to come from Apple, Microsoft, or Google, those are all things that the traditional public key cryptography protects today and will be vulnerable when a cryptographically relevant quantum computer exists.
Do we win this race?
I think so, yep, but we're also on the journey, right? Everybody's aware of it. We've got to start thinking about how do you do your inventory of where is public key cryptography used in my enterprise? And that's the first step. Until you know where it is, you can't start to have the plan that will get you in 10 years to a solution where it's out of your ecosystem.
Which, if you look historically, I mean, and I love the case you're making for innovation, because at the end of the day, we have to out-innovate. There's just no question in my mind. But often it's the application and how you're actually using that technology. And from warfare and conflict all the way through to business and industry, often not the technology, it's how you're actually using it. And that's one component, I think, is essential. Rob, we're coming near the end of our time, and I love to ask the last question, meaning what questions didn't I ask that I should have asked, because you've covered a whole waterfront here, but you know so much more than I do, and I want to make sure we give our audience an opportunity to think some of those things.
So you started with the RSA question about what am I hearing. What I'm talking about is the threats I've seen over the last year. I'm seeing trends move away from the attacks on the desktops and the servers. So, you know, this industry here at RSA has done a good job of building products, EDR and security products that are starting to get a good handle on protecting the endpoints. But there's still whole classes of devices in, you know, carrier class routers and switches and things that are unprotected.
OT, bring it up, please.
Yep. And it's not even just OT, it's the dark
IoT,
corners of IT
that
are not well logged, not well protected. And we saw that in Typhoon. You know, they didn't go to the servers, they went to the network components, and they stole identity that didn't have two-factor authentication. So it's really hard. In a lot of big networks, you've got to have machines talk to machines. So a computer logs into another computer, or router talks to another router, and in that, you know, they're not doing two-factor authentication. So if you've compromised that network and you can scrape the script that enables that computer-to-computer communication, now you've got something that inside the network that is authenticated and already omnipresent throughout the communications, so it hides in the noise. So thinking about that shift of the attackers don't use malware, they don't like to go to endpoints that have EDR and good logging. They are now moving to the network devices and also then into the cloud, taking identity and just going up into your authenticated cloud and not into your devices themselves.
Is very significant exposure from an attack surface perspective. Rob, thank you for spending so much time with us today, and thank you for all your good work to benefit all of us in our great country, and for being a patriot and leading. So thank you. We're a better country for it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Cyber Focus. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing. Your ratings and reviews help us reach more listeners. Drop us a line if you have any ideas in terms of topics, themes, or individuals you'd like for us to host. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay curious.